I thought I knew Michael better than anyone. I'd been there through his long nights at the office, the missed dinners, the endless stress that seemed to live in his briefcase. So when he came home one evening grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery, I assumed it was about work. But then he placed a small velvet box on the coffee table, his eyes gleaming with a pride I hadn't seen in years. When I opened it, my breath caught. Inside was a necklace so delicate, so expensive-looking it seemed to glow under the lamp. "This is for my mother," he said, his tone almost too smooth. "She deserves something beautiful." I smiled because that's what I was supposed to do. But inside, my chest tightened. A gift like this? For her? It didn't make sense. Michael wasn't the kind of man who gave without reason. Birthdays, anniversaries, even Christmas. His gifts were always practical, almost predictable. But this necklace, it was a contradiction I couldn't ignore. I tucked away my doubt behind a polite nod, saying nothing, but in my heart, I felt the sharp edge of suspicion. It sat with me like a pebble in my shoe, and I knew I'd carry it with me straight into the gala. That night, while Michael went on about his plans for the gala, I couldn't stop glancing at that necklace. The way it shimmered under the light, the weight of it against the velvet box. It didn't look like something chosen for a mother. It looked like something chosen for a lover. Still, I kept quiet, nodding at the right moments, letting him believe his story had landed. But deep inside, unease was tightening its grip on me. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was being unfair. Michael was ambitious, yes, but he was also practical. He never splurged. For years I had begged him to take a vacation, buy something just for us, but he always said, "We need to save, Laura." And now, suddenly, this? My instincts whispered that there was more to it. My heart thudded in agreement. I brushed my fingers against the necklace once more before closing the box, as though touching it could give me the answers I wanted. But all it gave me was a chill, a warning I couldn't shake. Michael kissed my forehead like everything was fine, like we were the same couple we had always been. I smiled back, but in my gut, I knew the truth was coming. And the gala would be the stage where it revealed itself. In the days that followed, Michael acted as though nothing was out of the ordinary. He talked about the gala with excitement, about the people he needed to impress, about the board members whose opinions mattered more than anything else. I played along, smiling, listening, pouring him coffee in the mornings like I always had. But every time I glanced at that jewelry box on his dresser, I felt the sting of doubt all over again. I began watching him more closely, noticing the little things I'd ignored before, the way he checked his phone and quickly slid it back into his pocket, the way he came home a little later than usual, brushing it off with vague excuses. For years I had trusted him without hesitation, but now, even the smallest cracks felt like gaping holes. And the necklace, that necklace, was the proof I couldn't explain away. Still, I said nothing. I swallowed my questions, saving them for a moment that hadn't yet come. There was no fight, no confrontation, just silence, stretched thin like a thread ready to snap. I told myself to wait, to watch, to hold on until the truth finally showed its face. And something told me, when it did, it would happen under the sparkling lights of the gala. The night of the gala arrived, and I dressed with more care than usual. A sleek black dress, simple but elegant, pearls at my ears, and a steady hand applying lipstick that betrayed none of the storm brewing inside me. Michael looked every bit the polished executive, crisp suit and practiced smile, the kind of man who thrived under chandeliers and champagne toasts. As we stepped into the grand hall, I held onto his arm, my face glowing with pride. Or at least, that's what I let them all see. The room buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the low hum of whispered conversations. I smiled. I nodded. I played the role of the supportive wife. That was my part, after all, the one I had perfected through the years. But beneath the surface, I was scanning, watching. My eyes wandered across sequined gowns and tailored suits, searching for something I couldn't quite name yet. Until suddenly, I found it. She was standing near the bar, her hair catching the golden light like it belonged there, her laughter bright, practiced. Sophie, Michael's assistant. And there, resting delicately on her collarbone, was the necklace. The very same necklace Michael swore was for his mother. My breath stilled in my chest as though someone had knocked the air right out of me. And when Sophie's eyes locked onto mine, she smiled. Not kindly, not innocently, but with a smirk that said she knew exactly what she was doing. That smirk, it was like a silent dare, a taunt wrapped in lipstick and confidence. My stomach twisted, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Instead, I lifted my glass, sipped my champagne, and offered a smile so poised it could have been carved from glass. If she wanted a reaction, she'd have to work harder for it. Still, inside, the betrayal burned hot and merciless. Michael, oblivious, or pretending to be, chatted with colleagues, laughing louder than necessary, performing like the night was his personal stage. I drifted through the room, mingling with other wives and partners, nodding through their stories of vacations, children, and summer homes. But my mind wasn't there. It stayed fixed on that necklace, gleaming like a spotlight, screaming the truth I hadn't wanted to hear. At one point, Sophie brushed past me, her perfume trailing like a warning. She tilted her head just slightly, enough for the diamond to catch the light. I swear she did it on purpose. My hands clenched around my clutch, but my face stayed calm, unreadable. If Michael had taught me anything through the years, it was patience. And in that moment, I knew. Patience would be my weapon. As the evening carried on, I found myself drifting further into observation. Every glance, every whisper seemed sharper, like the room had split into two worlds, the one everyone else was enjoying, and the one where I stood, quietly unraveling a truth I could no longer deny. I caught Michael sneaking looks toward Sophie, subtle but not subtle enough for me to miss. Each look was a spark, and together they painted a fire I could no longer pretend wasn't there. I kept my smile steady, my laughter polite, while inside my chest, a storm was building. Betrayal doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It slithers in, quiet and cruel, and then suddenly it's everywhere. I wondered how many of the people around us already knew, how many had seen what I was just now forced to face. That thought stung more than the necklace itself. By the time the speeches began, I no longer heard the words. Applause rippled through the crowd, but all I could feel was the weight of that glittering truth hanging around Sophie's neck. My fingers tightened around my glass, and I whispered silently to myself, "Not here, not now." The stage wasn't ready yet. But when it was, oh, I'd be more than ready. My heart sank that night, but I refused to let it show. I kept my smile painted on, even as the truth settled like a stone in my stomach. Betrayal has a way of making the world feel louder. The clink of glasses, the burst of laughter, the hum of conversation. All of it suddenly rang in my ears, mocking me. But I stood tall, heels anchored to the marble floor, determined not to crack under Sophie's smug gaze. Later, as I made my way through the crowd, I caught the sound of her voice again. Sophie laughed, her tone dripping with something just shy of arrogance. "Some men really know how to spoil a woman," she teased, her words directed at no one in particular, yet sharp enough to cut. Her colleagues chuckled knowingly, and that was all I needed. The necklace wasn't just jewelry, it was evidence. And her laugh was the confession. I didn't confront Michael that night. What would have been the point? Anger in public only feeds the guilty, and I wasn't about to give him that power. Instead, I tucked the truth neatly into my silence, saving it like ammunition for a war I hadn't yet declared. Planning is an art, and I suddenly realized I had been preparing my whole life to master it. The drive home that night was quiet. Michael hummed along to the radio, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, completely unaware of the storm raging beside him. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red, thinking how strange it felt to sit so close to someone who had already betrayed me. He glanced at me once, asked if I was tired, and I just smiled. Tired wasn't the word. It was hollow, raw, wide awake in every sense. When we pulled into the driveway, I carried myself inside like nothing had changed, though everything had. Michael poured himself a drink, loosened his tie, and turned on the news as if it were any other evening. I excused myself, retreating to the bedroom. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I realized that silence was no longer weakness. It was strategy. If he thought I was blind, then I had the upper hand. Lying awake, I began piecing things together. Every late night, every secretive glance at his phone, every excuse suddenly fell into place like puzzle pieces I had ignored for too long. The picture was ugly, yes, but it was also clear. And in that clarity, I found something surprising, not despair, but resolve. Michael had made his move. Now it was my turn to make mine. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair with deliberate slowness. My reflection looked the same, but I felt different. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back, revealing the stage for what it truly was. Michael's betrayal wasn't just a wound, it was an opening, a chance to rewrite the story I had been living in for far too long. And I wasn't going to waste it on shouting matches or tearful begging. As Michael rushed out the door with his briefcase, I watched him go, my expression calm, almost serene. He thought he had fooled me, thought I was too trusting to see the truth. That was his mistake. Because trust, once broken, doesn't disappear. It sharpens. It becomes focus, precision. I wasn't the woman who would crumble under the weight of his lies. I was the woman who would use them. I walked back inside, poured myself a cup of coffee, and let the steam warm my face. My mind was already working, quietly, methodically, as if the pieces had been waiting for this moment to fall into place. Revenge didn't need to be loud, it needed to be clever. And I knew exactly where I would start, by finding the proof that would turn his glittering necklace into his downfall. At home, when Michael wasn't around, I began my quiet search. It started innocently enough, an extra glance at his phone left on the counter, a careful look through the pockets of his jackets. But soon it became deliberate, a mission. I wasn't hunting for suspicion anymore. I was hunting for proof. And proof, I discovered, is never as well hidden as the guilty think it is. The first clue came in the form of a receipt crumpled in his desk drawer. A dinner for two at a restaurant he had sworn he'd never taken me to because it was too extravagant. I held the paper in my hand, the ink still bold, as if daring me to deny what I already knew. Then came the messages, tucked away in his email, filled with words that left no room for interpretation. Sophie's name appeared more times than I could count, tangled with promises and secrets. Each discovery cut deep, but strangely it didn't break me. Instead, it steadied me. With every receipt, every message, every careless slip Michael had left behind, I felt my anger harden into something sharper, something I could use. Rage might burn hot, but strategy lasts. And I was beginning to see exactly where his weaknesses lived. One evening, after Michael fell asleep on the couch with a half-empty glass of scotch, I slipped into his office. The glow of his computer screen lit up the dark room, casting long shadows across the shelves he was so proud of. I opened folders, clicked through emails, and scrolled until my stomach knotted. There it was. Reservations, hotel confirmations, even photos he had been careless enough to save. Sophie's smile, her hand resting on his shoulder like she owned him. But what caught my attention wasn't just the affair. It was his timing. In a series of messages, I found references to the board's upcoming decision, the very one Michael had been obsessing over for months. Sophie teased him about celebrating once his promotion came through, about how she'd be there to spoil him when it happened. Suddenly, their little secret wasn't just personal, it was professional. And that made it dangerous. I leaned back in his chair, my pulse steady despite the fury in my chest. I knew enough about Michael's world to understand one thing. Perception was everything. A whisper in the wrong ear could unravel a career built over decades. And Sophie, well, she wasn't exactly the model of discretion. I realized then, I didn't need to confront them. I only needed to let the right people see what I had seen. The next day, while Michael showered, I quietly copied the files onto a flash drive I had tucked into my robe pocket. Screenshots of messages, photos of Sophie at the gala with the necklace, even the receipts. Every piece of evidence neatly organized, waiting to be used. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to cry. All I needed was timing, and timing, I had learned, was everything. It didn't take long to find the perfect opportunity. Sophie's name had already floated through the office rumor mill, whispers about her closeness to Michael. All it took was a carefully worded anonymous email to HR, with attachments that spoke louder than any accusation. I wrote it plainly, without venom, letting the facts do the damage for me. The necklace glimmered in one of the photos, unmistakable, undeniable. When I hit send, a calmness washed over me. It wasn't the kind of satisfaction that comes from revenge delivered. It was the anticipation, the knowledge that the wheels were in motion and couldn't be stopped. Michael thought he was untouchable. Sophie thought she was clever, but I knew better. The necklace wasn't her prize, it was her noose. And soon enough, they'd both feel it tightening. Weeks later, the fallout arrived like a storm no one saw coming, except me. Michael was called into the boardroom, his face pale as whispers trailed behind him like shadows. I knew what was waiting for him in there, the evidence, the photographs, the undeniable connections between him and Sophie. His promotion, the one he had built his entire future on, was suddenly suspended. The look in his eyes when he walked through the door that evening told me everything. He slammed his briefcase on the counter, his fury spilling out in every sharp word. "Do you have any idea what they're saying about me? About us?" he shouted, pacing like a caged animal. But I stayed calm, my voice steady, my hands folded in front of me. Anger was his weapon, not mine. Mine was truth, sharpened and ready. And I wasn't going to let him twist it anymore. Michael blamed me, of course. Men like him always do. But in that moment, standing in our kitchen with his rage bouncing off the walls, I realized something important. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I had lived too long in his shadow, too long silencing my own instincts. Now, with the truth laid bare for the world to see, it was finally my turn to speak. And when I did, I made sure he'd never forget it. I looked him straight in the eyes, letting his fury burn itself out against the wall of my silence. Then, when the room fell quiet, I finally spoke. "You said it was for your mother," I reminded him, my voice calm, deliberate. He froze, his jaw tightening, because he knew exactly what I meant. That necklace had been his lie, his downfall, the thread I had pulled until the entire fabric of his life unraveled. He tried to defend himself, stumbling over excuses, twisting words like he always did. But I didn't flinch. "Turns out you were right," I said, my hand already sliding the wedding ring off my finger. "Because only a mother would still love a son who lies like you." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream, and for the first time, I saw him without his armor, small and cornered. I placed the ring on the counter, the metal clicking softly against the marble, final and undeniable. His eyes widened, not in sorrow but in panic. Panic at losing the control he had always assumed he held. And as he stood there, sputtering for words that wouldn't come, I walked toward the door with a steady calm. This wasn't a goodbye in tears. It was freedom in motion, the first breath of air after being underwater too long. By the time I stepped outside, the night air wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't know I needed. My bag was already packed, my accounts already secured, every step carefully planned long before this moment. Michael thought he had been clever, thought he'd been in control, but I had been 3 steps ahead. I wasn't walking into the unknown. I was walking into a future I had built for myself. Behind me, through the window, I could see him pacing, his hands pulling at his hair as though that might undo the truth. But the truth was permanent now, carved into his reputation, stitched into his career. Sophie was gone, dismissed quietly to protect the company's image. His promotion, frozen indefinitely. And me? I was no longer the quiet wife who stood by in silence. I was the woman who had ended the performance. As I closed the gate, I whispered the words I had been holding back for weeks. He bought her a necklace. I gave her the noose. And with that, I didn't look back. The chapter of Michael and his lies was finished, but my story, my real story, was only just beginning.